double point knitting needles open a variety of wonderful projects that you can do. I definitely recommend using bamboo needles. They work just like street needles, except they don't have the end here. You're going to pretty much want to have the same basic things you would have if you were knitting on straight needles or circular needles. These are a US size 7, so you're going to want your double point needles. I have a stitch marker. Stitch markers are a little bit different for double point needles because obviously it's like circular needles, but it's not a continuous round shape because you're using straight double pointed needles. So get something that you can stick onto the yarn. It doesn't have to be bought at the store. This just happens to be from Clover. I love Clover. It's a safety pin, but the end isn't sharpened, so I can stick it onto a stitch when I'm knitting, because I tried using basic yarn when I was using my double pointed needles, but it kept slipping off and I kept losing my spot, so I eventually just bought this for $2, and I loved it, and I still do love it. And that's from Clover. My double point needles are also from Clover. I love Clover. They make really good products. That's what all my double pointed needles and my stitch markers and my circular needles is from Clover. Bamboo is really good to work with. The stitches slip easily along the needles and they're clean, they don't splinter, and I love it. Okay, so when you're knitting on double pointed needles, you're going to want to take one of your needles and you're going to want to take the yarn you're using. I'm using the leftover yarn from my cabled hat that I did in the last video. And you're going to want to cast on the number of required stitches that your pattern says, as you regularly do. I don't know how you guys might cast on, but I use the long tail cast on. I've already cast on just so I can show you guys. My pattern calls for 34 stitches, and this is actually a pattern that I'm inventing as I go along because I'm just curious to see what will happen. And it's pretty much like a regular circular knitting. You're going to want to cast on as many as it says. You're going to want to push all the stitches down to the end you're going to want. And double point needles come in a package of 4 to 5. I get the 5 just because I like the extra needle in case I want a cable or something. I'm going to be using 3. You're going to want to take another needle, and you're going to want to distribute all of these stitches evenly onto another double point needle, and you're going to want to start at the end away from your cast on tail. I find that's the easiest end to work with because you're not fighting with the loose loop here at the end. So since I have 34 stitches, I have to divide these evenly. That comes out to 12 on one needle, 12 on another, and then 10 on the last needle. Whew, I know, that sounds really complicated. So you're going to want to start by casting on 12. And you don't have to knit them, you could just gently slip them. So you're going to want to make sure your stitches don't twist just like you would on regular circular needles. I'm going to distribute these evenly. 2, 3, 4. Don't forget to move your stitches along. Hope you guys can see this. 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, see it's going on to the other needle, 11, 12. And it's going to look like this. It's going to pretty much look like what it would look like if you were just using 2 needles to knit. Now, this part is going to look really messy, but I promise you this is what it's supposed to look like. So you drop that needle, you make sure none of the stitches are going to fall off. I tend to push them to the middle. You're going to want to take your third double pointed needle, and you're going to want to now slip another 12 onto this needle, working from where you left off. So you're going to take your needle, and you're going to start slipping. 1, 2, and my yarn's yelling at me, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, make sure you move your stitches along, 9, 10, 11, and 12. And you're going to have something that looks a little bit like that. I promise you it's supposed to look like that. You're going to want to make sure all your stitches are facing the same way, because if you twist it before you even start knitting, you're going to encounter problems, and we don't want that. So just like on circular needles, you're going to want to make sure that they aren't twisting. Now, okay, so you now have all of your stitches evenly divided on your 3 circular knitting needles, or 4 depending on how many stitches you have. You're going to want to place a stitch marker that I was telling you about at the beginning of your row, just like you would on regular circular needles. And now you're going to want to join them in the round. As I mentioned, make sure all the stitches are facing the same way. Make sure you have your throwing yarn and your long tail out of the way. I tend to knit my tail, my really long tail, into my first stitch, just because I feel more secure. I'm not going to lose the stitches. So what you're going to do now is you're going to take another DPN. As I mentioned, they come in packs of 4 or 5. I'm only using 4 needles here, so because I'm going to be using my other DPN to be cabling. So I'm only using 4. You're going to, this is the tricky part, organize it so you can actually work with it, first of all. Then you're going to take your other double pointed needle and you're going to slip it into your first stitch, like you would when you're just regular knitting. You're going to take the tail of your yarn, if you want to knit the tail into your item, that is. You don't have to, you could just tie a knot there, but I do it just for safety reasons. It makes me feel better. You're going to take that in your throwing yarn, you're going to wrap it around like you would regular knit, and then you're going, this is the hard part, you're going to want to make sure everything is still even. You're going to want to push your needle through and off. Congratulations, you've just joined in the round for working in the round on double pointed needles. And it looks kind of funky. As you can see, I've still got my 3 separate knitted parts, and this is my knitting needle now that I'm going to be knitting with. And then all you do is continue knitting as you would in the round. Let me move this. Oh, there we go. As you would in the round. Remember, don't forget your spot your stitch marker. I normally knit my tail into 2 stitches, so I'm going to do that. 2. And then I just drop my tail yarn, and I don't worry about it. It's not going to get in the way. And remember, the next time you go around, if you do knit the tail into, you're going to be knitting 2 stitches as one. So please don't forget that. And as you can see, let me turn it around, all of my work is still facing the same direction, which is good. All this extra needle is doing is knitting the stitches from this needle or this needle or this needle, whichever needle you end up working on, onto this needle, and pretty much doing the same thing as it would if you were working in the round. Alright, you've come to the last stitch on your first needle. As you can see, I'm increasing. Not literally increasing, but the stitches are getting bigger. You're going to knit the last stitch. Now, the needle you were working with has the stitches from the needle you just took off onto it. So yay! You just did your first row on double pointed needles. You're going to want to take the needle you just finished and do the exact same thing on the next row. And then this needle will be free and you do it on this row, and then you've completed your first round. And that's all there is to knitting on double pointed needles. It's a lot more simple than people think it is. One thing I am going to mention is when you are working with double pointed needles, since it isn't in a complete circle pattern, you're going to want to pull the last stitch tight, and you're going to want to pull the first stitch from the next needle tight. That way there isn't a slight gap from where you are trading needles, because when I first started working out, I noticed those gaps and it really bothered me, so I looked up a couple different ways to fix it, and one of them was pulling the first and last stitch a little tighter to make so that it doesn't form the gap, and it's worked out pretty well. So I'm just going to mention that, and I hope this video was helpful for you guys, and I hope you enjoyed it, and keep an eye out for more knitting videos. Love you guys. Bye. Happy knitting.